So for tonight, I have put together a short slide presentation, which is just more in the way of talking points, notes, if you like, which I will share with everybody who wants them if they do afterwards. Um, which will go through a few things. First of all, I think just a brief potted history of the journal itself, and then what the journal is for, followed by some information about what we mean when we talk about an academic and scholarly journal, and then um, some idea of the sort of articles that we kind of take on and look at and would want to see coming through. Then I'll talk a little bit about the process which articles go through once they've been received, so that as a writer you understand what happens to your article when it is received. And then I've got some do's and don'ts and hints and tips as to kind of things that will get your article through into the system or not, and where I might have to push it back to you and say, no, you need to do a few more things before we can take it into our system. So with that, Torea, can I ask you to put up the first slide and we can start? So they would try and start a journal to create, help create an identity for the society, amongst many other things that it does. But the journal itself is one of the things that does help create an identity for the society. And the first issue of the journal was put out in 1990. It was relatively short. There were probably about 8 or 10 articles in it, and but it was the first of what has now become a very long-standing publication. So in 1995, because there was clearly a demand for it and there was material coming through that people wanted to publish and editors felt was good enough to publish, we went to 2 issues a year. And since then, up to the present day, we've issued about well over 60 different editions of the journal. And the very latest developments that we now have, which we now have a dedicated website for the journal, not only to put up current articles and current issues, but we've now been able to put up all the back catalogue of issues, not only as single issues, but as single searchable articles in each issue as well. And this is now a new and I think incredibly valuable and flexible resource with over, as I say, 1,400 articles and book reviews, all searchable and all available to you as members of the SEA. If you are a member, you will have completely unfettered access to all of that. And it is now, I think, over the 38 years or 36 years, I think now, that the journal has been published, and the 65, 67 issues that we have, it's become a really substantial and I think quite important resource for research, and just a knowledge base for existential practitioners and other people who are interested in what we write about and what we think. Could I ask for the next slide, please, Torea? So I thought it might be helpful just to give a kind of sense of what the journal is, what it's for. So primarily, the journal was created as a way of being able to share and build knowledge of the theory and practice of existential and phenomenological psychotherapy amongst the people who coalesced into the SEA and became a part of the SEA, and as the SEA grew, as it drew in more people, that all the kind of experience, the teaching knowledge, and the theory that wasn't already published in major books, and major philosophical works, could be could be shared with the community at large. To that end, the journal was conceived of as something that was a scholarly academic journal, that the product of which would have been peer reviewed by knowledgeable, experienced uh, practitioners in the field, people who were teachers, maybe even teachers within university settings, perhaps with experience of being published themselves. And also that the journal would be published twice a year, and is now so in January and July. We put out each new edition. It's written for the members of the SEA. Again, to reiterate that point, to share knowledge, to help people to gain new insights, and also because it's not just the SEA that have access to it, but people can pay, and through other academic databases, practitioners in related fields and other people for general interest can read what authors publish in the journal. And as I say, it is accessed more widely by academics and students, not just psychotherapy, those training in psychotherapy, and those with a general interest in existential philosophy and phenomenology. Okay.
Yeah.
So each issue of the journal, we aim to publish about 12 to 15 what we call academic articles. I'll come back and talk about that more later. Academic articles can also include, I'll go to the bottom of that list and say, first and foremost, we take in independently written articles that are submitted just at any time. Whenever the author is ready to submit, they can submit an article to us that they've written, on their own or with a co-author or authors. And we will look at it and take it in. But other papers also come to us through conferences. There are a number of conferences with an existential psychotherapeutic theme that go on over a kind of 1 year or 4 year cycle. The SEA annual conference is obviously one. The European Federation of Existential Therapists as well. I think they have an annual conference. Is that right? If not, then it's once every couple of years. And then there's the World Forum, which Emmy van Derzen is very involved in, and that will produce a few articles as well. And we will take those in. And conference papers, generally speaking, are not subjected to quite such a rigorous peer review system, mainly on the basis that because they've been read at a conference or presented at a conference, that is the peer review process in practice, and that when we take them in, we'll generally publish them more or less as they are. We'll do a bit of editing, but not much. Apart from the academic papers that we publish, we also publish 6 to 10 reviews of books, films, or other relevant cultural things, artifacts, events, whatever. So if somebody wants to write a review, then that is something that they've seen or experienced as a exhibition or something like that. We're very happy to look at that, and we have a dedicated reviews editor who I'll introduce, not personally but by name, a little later on. And actually, I'll talk about the reviews a bit more, because for some writers, to write a review of something is actually a sort of slightly easier way of getting into the rhythm of how to publish in the journal. Because it's a little bit less daunting, a little bit less demanding to do that. And then finally, at the editor's discretion, sort of some other non-standard, slightly different things do get published on an occasional basis. And when I say that, I mean, unusual items, maybe very long, very scholarly articles about historic articles about. We had one fairly recently. Miles Groth published a long article on I can't remember who now, but it was quite long. It was quite unusual, but it was something that he asked us if we would publish, and we said yes, because he is he's a fine reviewer, a fine writer, and a fine academic, and had written a very long but very scholarly article, and we agreed to publish it. So we do publish things that are not within the kind of loose template of our normal fare, if you like. Sorry. Okay. So I thought it might be helpful to just loosely define what I mean when I talk about an academic article or a scholarly article, which are the kind of core 12 to 15 articles that we would aim to be publishing every 6 months in a new edition. And I just sort of, very simple kind of list of things. It has to be kind of we want to see that it was well researched, that the topic that was picked and written about had been read around, and articles, books, other culturally relevant material had been examined and digested. That the article was then properly referenced so that readers could follow the sources used by the author. And that the paper itself is kind of well structured. It's got a clear when I say beginning, middle, and end, that's sort of quite basic stuff. But in a sense that if there's a line of argument that you want to present through the article, that there are clear way markers to show readers how the argument is developing. We encourage the use of section titles and subtitles and things like that to signpost through the article how the article is developing. That there is a story to tell. I say it's argued. It could be a story. It could be something that flows, but flows in a way that is cogent. That I hesitate to use the word logical, but moves from step to step in a way that the reader can follow and can understand, and therefore is sort of has the quality of coherence in a way and clarity. Very, very technical jargon needs to be well explained. I think we would have difficulty if we received an article that was very kind of densely and jargon heavy and we whilst we are an academic journal in that sense, we want our readers to be able to get a clear sense of what the writer is trying to tell them within the framework of describing something of relevance to the existential and phenomenological practice of psychotherapy. Which I suppose brings us to the of sort of the question of kind of what sort of papers does that scholarly kind of that academic framework permit, if you like. I won't put strongly as that maybe, but because actually the field is pretty wide here, and there are many ways of being able to create something publishable for the journal. I think the first and foremost most important thing is that whatever you write has to be relevant. But relevance is a very wide, very broad and baggy category. So the sort of things we really do welcome with great enthusiasm are things like original research. And if you are a student, particularly on an MA program where you might be doing a full dissertation, or on a DPsych or a doctoral program where you're producing a full thesis, then that could form the basis for producing an article, or more than one article perhaps, for the journal. Particularly doctoral theses. We'll come to this a bit later, but a full doctoral thesis could be, I'm not sure how long they are these days. What, 30, 40,000 words, maybe more? Can anybody enlighten me on that?
60,000 for my DC Psych.
Okay, thank you, Noor. So obviously, that's not going to get published in the journal, but some abstract out of it, or some condensation of the key points out of it could form the basis of a journal article. Some kernel of that could, or maybe more than one article, and that could definitely form the basis of a journal article. Other sort of things that we often get are kind of a synthesis of reflective reading on a topic, something that again, if you're a student, particularly at the sort of back end of say the advanced diplomas for existential psychotherapy, the papers that I think are required of students on those could well be the sort of template by which a paper could be presented to the journal for review. And in fact, tutors and advisors and teachers on courses like that should be looking and helping students, particularly if they see a very promising paper, to encourage students to think about them as potentially publishable in the journal and to submit them for the journal. That's certainly how I got one of my first papers published, doing that. A reflective piece of client work could form the basis of that, something that not just of one client, but maybe several clients. That the theme has emerged from something that you've been working with some clients on, and maybe you've read around it a bit and had some thoughts about it. That could certainly be a very good point to bring a paper to life with. Obviously, we would want permissions and anonymity to be ethically obtained, and for that to be not admitted. I can't think what the right word is, but acknowledged in the paper. And then, taking it down to sort of very personal level, to some experiential exploration of some aspect that you have of working with clients that you feel, one's your own mood, your own sense of being in the room with clients, or being in the world with some aspect of yourself that you might be able to build out to a broader theme that could be of more general relevance. I'll come back to that because I do have some caveats about using the I voice, if you like, the voice of yourself in papers. Whether using it too much, using it too little, using it only to talk about your own experience, or to use the voice to broaden out to something more general, which is kind of what we would want to be looking for. Really, these are just ideas that I kind of wanted to suggest would form the base of good papers, but we are not limited to this range of things. That, as I say, the field is wide, but relevance to the theory and practice of existential phenomenological psychotherapy is the key here. Okay. So there are some boring bits to get through here. If I receive a paper that doesn't essentially meet the initial formatting requirements, I will send it back to the author immediately to ask them to fulfill the sort of basic criteria. And for academic papers, we're looking for papers of around about 5,000 words. We are not, as some academic courses are, using that number as a hard limit. We take papers that are shorter, we take papers that are a bit longer. But anything much longer than that needs a special reason for us to want to take it in and publish it. So if you're giving us an 8,000 word paper, then we're going to want a good reason why that 8,000 word paper should be taken into review. We need all our papers to be fully referenced using what I call the Harvard referencing system, and I can share guide documents on how that's done. But I think it's more or less, the standard for referencing that most universities, most academic courses are using. And that, of course, will include the end bibliography in author alphabetical order, again, using the Harvard formatting. The reason that we are hot on referencing and proper referencing is that it's a form of accountability that the author allows the reader to be able to follow the workings of the writer. So that if they refer to Heidegger's being in time, or Sartre's being in nothingness, or anything that they have read and want to cite in the work, that the reader can then follow that if they want to. A lot of readers don't. Many readers don't bother, but they trust the authors. But if they want to follow the referencing, the use of sources, that they can do so. So going back to our requirements, we need a title page just with a title of the paper, an abstract that summarizes what the reader is going to see in the paper, not the actual paper itself, but what they will read. So 70 to 100 words, up to 8 key search words. So the search words are allow the paper to be searched for on academic databases. So that if you have a particular interest in, say, I don't know, anti-psychotherapy and Thomas Szasz, you can search the academic databases with those words, and they'll come up with papers that have written about that. And that's why we include the key search words. I'm not sure if our own database is able to use those search words yet, but that's something we are looking at to see if our own database can do that. But other academic databases onto which the journal is loaded will use them. We also ask for a short biography of the writer or writers. 50 to 70 words is enough. A contact address or addresses that will be published with the article, again, so that writers can contact the author if they want to either follow up on something or ask for more information about the article. So I don't know how often it happens. It's never happened to me, but it might happen. And it's again, it's a sort of form of not accountability, but access, that people can access the author if they want to ask a private question. And now, because it's 2025 and 2026, and we live in the age of AI, we don't reject articles because they've used AI, but we do want to know how AI has been used, and for the author to acknowledge that in the article, and we'll take it from there. Okay. For reviews, as I say, writing a review is a really good way of trying out yourself, trying to find your voice, your maybe even your courage to get published in the article, is to write a review. It's a much less rigorous process, much less rigorous formatting required. The articles will tend to be shorter, maybe 2,000 words, 1,800, 2,000, maybe more. It depends on how much you feel you want to say about the book you've read, or the film you've seen, or the exhibition you've been to. Referencing tends to be, because it's a much more personal experience. You're experiencing the work, you're writing about what you felt about it, what you thought about it, what you want the reader to know about it. Referencing is a much less inherently integral part of the writing process. But where you do reference another work or another author to make a point or to illustrate something, we obviously ask that would be properly referenced, as it would be in a full academic article. You obviously cite the title of the book that you're or film or whatever, and the dates that you the date of the production, not necessarily the date you saw it or read it or experienced it, but just as you would if you were just referencing a book in an article, and then your name. but not a potted biography. We don't ask for an abstract or a potted biography or contact details even. The reviews editor is Ondine Smulders. She's been doing the work for as long as I've been doing the peer reviewing and other stuff. So if you want to write a review, she will be able to help you, and you can contact her and if she has any other requirements or any other requirements arise, again, you can contact her and she can help you with that. She also actually has a list. She keeps a list of books that get sent to us for review. So if there's something, I think it gets published in the journal every 6 months, so that you can see what's on the review list and that may take your interest if these are particularly books, um, but if you've but you can self-generate anything you feel would be of interest. If you've seen a film, if you picked out a book that interested you and read it and felt, yes, that I feel that could be of interest, then that's absolutely fine, and in fact positively encouraged. Okay. So I thought it might be helpful to just describe what the process is of sending your article to us and then it coming out the other end as a published article in the journal, um, months or weeks, months, or perhaps even longer later. The process can take some time. So most of the articles that we receive have initially been sent in document form, a manuscript, or I'll call a manuscript form, but mainly obviously in Word document, and we do want Word documents, not PDFs, Word documents, by an email either to the submission address at journal at existentialanalysis.org.uk, or to me personally, or to Ondine personally if they're reviews. So once we've received it, I will then Ondine will obviously do her thing with reviews. So if it's an academic article, the first thing I will do is I will sort of do a triage process and first of all make sure that it has got all the sort of right characteristics that we want. It's long enough, it's properly referenced, it's got a title, all the things I talked about. If it's got all of those things, I'll then give it an initial read to assess the content of it, to try and therefore get a sense of who amongst the review panel, of which more slightly later, could be the best fit to read that article for the first full review. And I will then allocate a reviewer to that article. So the article now enters the first formal review. Wherever possible, it's not always possible, but wherever it is possible, we try to make the review a double-blind process. What I mean by that is that neither the author nor the reviewer know who each other is. So when you send me the paper with your name and your potted biography and all the other things that we ask you of it, when I send it to the reviewer, I will have stripped those out. Now, occasionally, we get a situation where an author has referenced in their own paper a lot of their own work. And therefore, the process of anonymizing the paper becomes quite hard. So in that case, we will either blank out the name of the author when they reference themselves in the bibliography and in the text, or we will ask the author to do that for us, to try and make sure that the double-blind process is as effective as possible. As I say, it's not always possible for the double-blind process to happen. I occasionally review papers myself. Obviously, I always receive them, so I know who the author is. But sometimes it's quite difficult to place a paper with another reader. And if I don't know the writer and have no, conflict of interest with the paper that they've written. So occasionally I will do that, but I will know who the author is. Same with the editors as well. It happens sometimes. So the first formal review process, this can take 3 to 6 months to happen. All the authors, all the reviewers and all the editors and myself, we do this in our spare time, if you like. So we don't get paid for it or anything like that. So we are generous with the amount of time that we try and allow for reviewers and people contributing to this process to do their work because they are doing it in their spare time. They will take the paper, they'll read it, and they'll read it against a set of criteria that I'll come to afterwards, that we ask them to score the paper by. Now, the scores are not something that we share with authors afterwards. What we share with the author afterwards is the comments, the suggestions, the feedback, the advice, for example, that a reviewer might give to the author to make the paper better or to praise the paper that they've read, or whatever. And then the first reviewer will recommend an outcome. There are 5 outcomes. The paper is either good enough to be accepted straight away as it is, in which case it will go to the editors for their approval. The paper might require a few minor changes. Minor changes can be anything from just a few typos, a bit of extra referencing, to maybe there's a section that doesn't quite work well and needs a bit of redrafting. But beyond that, the paper is essentially accepted, and with those minor tweaks and changes, it will be passed to the editors for the editorial review. The paper may need major changes. It may be a paper that's interesting, it's got some good points to it, but maybe it needs some substantial rewriting in certain ways. Maybe the argument doesn't flow very well. Maybe the paper is a bit short and could be expanded on in important respects. It could be any number of things, but sometimes we ask for major changes to be made, and when we do that, I will sometimes ask for a second formal review to be done, particularly if the first reviewer felt that perhaps they weren't quite grasping the paper. Maybe it was slightly outside their area of expertise. As I say, we always try and place a paper with somebody with real expertise in the particular field that the author is writing about, but it's not always possible. Maybe the paper is contentious in some way, and a second formal review might be useful. There may be papers that we get that just we can't make them better in any way. I mean, they're just not good enough, so we have to reject them. Doesn't happen very often, actually, but we do sometimes get that. We also get papers that are written in good faith, but are just not relevant to the journal, and so we sometimes reject papers on that basis. Sometimes we might get a paper like that, but we can see that another journal might be interested in that paper. It's just not for us, and so we will then recommend that to the author that they perhaps seek another journal to as an outlet for their work. So those are the 5 major outcomes. As I said, a second review may come into play in some cases. All the papers will then go to an editorial review, particularly the ones that particularly get through the first, second, and third, and the 5th outcomes there will probably all go to editorial review as well. And the editorial review is in 2 parts, because they will, first of all, they'll review papers that I pass to them as potentially publishable. They'll also then, when they've got enough articles for the next issue, they'll start to make a selection of articles that they will pick for the next issue. And then they will put all the articles through their own first proofreading process. The articles then go to a second proofreading process with we have a professional proofreader who's the only person that gets paid in this process. and then prepared for publication. Um, Once upon a time, that would be marking, putting it up in PDF format and sending it off to the publishers. But now we don't publish in hard copy. Um, so it's then ready for preparation and ready for publishing on the website. So the first issue was this year in January. That was the first one we went straight to website with. And July's issue will be just the same. And if you want it in hard copy, it will be available on Amazon for publish on demand, which is obviously the last phase of the process. So the criteria that the reviewers use. Sorry, I should pause just for a second here, if only so that I can have a glass of water. See if there are any initial questions that have come up, that any clarification that you need, or what anyone would want. No? Okay. So the reviewing and reader panel, we have about 20 people on the review panel. And these are all experienced. Some of them are academics, some of them are experienced practitioners, some of them are former academics, people who've taught. All of them have particular fields of interest that they have. As I say, we can't always allocate a paper to somebody who's an expert, but we will try our best. They've often all, in fact, I think all of them have been published themselves, either in book form, sometimes many times, or as in articles in the journal. So they're experienced readers. And they, as I say, the 7 dimensions that they read a paper on are there they are. They're asked to assess papers on the significance of the topic in relation to existential phenomenological psychotherapy. The contribution to knowledge, is it adding anything extra to what's already known, what's already been written about? Has the topic they have chosen to do, have they covered the reading of that around that topic adequately? Is their argument, is the point they're trying to make in their paper clearly done so? Is it presented well? Is their writing comprehensible? Is it readable? Do their conclusions make sense, and do they fall validly out of the arguments they're making? And are the readers likely to be interested in what they've written about? That's what they're asked to assess papers on against. As I say, when they mark the paper, that's for us to see in the editorial sort of office, if you like. What you as a writer would see would be the comments that because we encourage the reviewers to write comments, even if they've loved the paper and say, "Yep, publish it. No need for any more on this." We still encourage the reviewer to write something, so the reader to make some comments, so that the writer has some sense of other than just a pat on the back and say, "Well done, good paper." Is what was it about the paper that was so good, or not? What will help the author to make the paper better? Some of the best reviewers will really make that almost like a conversation with the author, because it might go back and forth 1 or 2 times, and it can be a really illuminating and helpful process on both sides, actually. I've had some good experiences with that, with reviewers and readers appreciating each other's contributions to making a paper better. Okay. So why would you even write a paper? What's in it for you? So there are a few. So the things that strike me, or the things that I thought, could be things that you get out of writing this. So why would you write a paper? Well, something strikes you. You have that moment where you think, I've got an idea. I've achieved some insight in my work or my reading. I've got a new little research project that's come to me, and you want to share it. You feel it's something worth sharing with others. that they might benefit from that insight you've gained, that idea you've had, that new author that you've come across and feel is sort of underrepresented in the literature or whatever, and you want others to know about it. And the journal is an excellent outlet to a wider, knowledgeable audience of readers who will be able to assess what you've written, appreciate it, and perhaps even enter into a dialogue with you to learn more or to help you learn more as well. For some others, there are some people in teaching positions and academics and also some practitioners in certain roles who need to be published. They need to get a body of published work under them. Again, if the work is relevant and passes through the review process, the journal is a good place to do that. And now that we've been running for nearly 36 years, we've got nearly 1,500 articles, 65 plus issues up. We have a position. It might be a small niche position, but we have a position as an established journal where publishing an article means something. For yourself, it could mean perhaps getting your name out there, building your brand as a sort of particular type of existential, something that you specialize in, or some aspect of existential psychotherapy that you feel is particularly important and you're very strong with. And you can obviously add the publication to your CV in that list of publications in the same way that academics need to, but not necessarily as a therapist. You need to do that, but it adds to the thickness of your experience as a practitioner. Writing also gains you lots of CPD hours. So if you need to build up CPD hours on a yearly or 5-yearly basis for annual accreditation and 5-year reaccreditation, researching, reading, writing, and then getting your paper published does count for some CPD hours. You can, I'll leave it to your conscience to how many you actually claim for that, but it is it's a valuable way of building up CPD hours. Reviewing is a particularly good way of doing that. I mean, it's a good way of getting sort of, I don't know, 10 CPD hours by reading a book and then writing 2,000 words about it. That's a very, very good way of doing it. And then, of course, there's just the sheer pleasure of seeing your name on the index page of the next issue. That you are now a published author in the journal. So maybe we've taken a long time to get here, but some hints and tips, I suppose. What many of you might really have come for. So I've done a kind of do's and don'ts list here. I've tried not to be too prescriptive about this and too negative with the don'ts, but things that I think, because there is no way I cannot sit here and say here's the formula to write a good paper for the journal, because they come in lots of different shapes and sizes, but there is a kind of general template that we are looking for. So the things I would recommend is just be excited and keen on what you want to say and enjoy the process of writing it down and saying it. If it's a slog, if it's not something that you really kind of are feeling the love for, then you're probably not going to write a particularly good paper, because it's just going to feel like hard work. Write about what interests you, and that about stuff that you've researched, you've read, you've experienced for yourself. I don't want to say the first. We'll come to that in a minute. The first person voice, but writing what you know is a great deal easier than writing what you don't know. Be clear and focused. Choose your topic. Focus on that topic. Try not to be too sort of qualificatory about it. Write too much around it. If you've got something that you're interested in, write about that. Relevance is always key here. We are a journal seeking to advance learning and knowledge in the field of existential phenomenological psychotherapy. Um, we are quite broad in how we treat that. Um, and so if your paper is a broadly theoretical paper where you're citing, authors and philosophers, and you want to try and make a particular point about some aspect of existential or phenomenological theory, broadly speaking, that's fine if you can tie it in a small way to some aspect of actually practicing as a psychotherapist. A purely theoretical paper about Kierkegaard's, vision of, the leap to faith or whatever is kind of not going to be enough. You are going to have to find a way, however tangentially, of tying it to psychotherapy. We occasionally do get papers from people who are clearly, probably assistant philosophy professors in a university department who write about, I don't know, Edith Stein or Max Scheler or something like that, but they're not practicing psychotherapists and they don't tie it to psychotherapy. Um, it's not to say that writing a paper for the journal, you need to be a psychotherapist. We're actually going to publish a paper in the next issue, which I'm quite excited about because I think it was a really interesting paper. But the guy who wrote it is not a practicing psychotherapist, but he is able to frame what he has written about in a psychotherapeutic setting, if you like, which gives it the relevance that it needs. Be sparing with the I voice. So personal experience, very important, and enriches any paper that we receive. But it's in a sense, when you write the paper, it's not all about you. It has to expand out to something that will be of relevance to your readers and to the broader task of the journal, which is to expand our knowledge of existential phenomenological psychotherapy. I'm going to stop saying that. Be open to feedback from reviewers. So if your paper doesn't quite, make it through the first cut of acceptance on the first review, then look at the feedback. The feedback will always be as helpful as possible, and try and give pointers as to where papers can be improved, or where the paper might have a shortcoming and need to be addressed. Be open to that because the reviewers and the editors and all of us want good papers and we want to publish. We don't want to just sort of read a paper and go, ha, that was rubbish, send that back. We don't want to do that. We want to publish papers. And so, we want and give and encourage our reviewers to give constructive, practical feedback where papers need some extra work and adhere to our formatting requirements. Okay. So don'ts. So don't be too ambitious. We asked for 5,000 words because it is it allows authors to say quite a lot. I mean, they can really start to excavate into a topic much more than say a 2,000 word paper could, and that's what we want to bring to our readers. And whilst 5,000 words does give you that amount of room, it does have limitations. There, it's quite easy if you really get into the zone with something to go way beyond 5,000 words. Now, I've said earlier on that 5,000 words is not a hard limit, but papers, very long papers, we would question whether or not we are the place to publish that. There might be ways around it. We could take very long papers, cut them into two, make two papers out of them. There are all sorts of things we can do, and we will be as helpful as we can be. But 5,000 words it's a guide for a purpose. And most of the papers that we receive, we want to see them at around that limit. So don't write a 2,000 word paper or a 10,000 word paper. The 10,000 word paper, as I say, we might be able to work with that in a different way. But the 2,000 word paper is kind of not enough, and we need authors. We want authors. We encourage authors to take that shorter paper and see if they can broaden it out, deepen it, research it further, and make it into something more than that. Okay. Try not to reinvent the wheel. That probably goes with the "don't be too ambitious" type advice. Um, I have occasionally received a paper where somebody has tried to kind of overturn the whole paradigm of psychotherapy or something like that, and it's just like I'm not sure the journal is the place to do that. I'm not sure what you're saying is really relevant to our expansion of knowledge in the field that we cover. Um, it's in a sense trying to be too ambitious. Paradigm shifting. Often I don't want to speak ill of people who try this, but often there's a bit of vanity involved in here, and we're trying to sort of not be too kind of ego driven with writing papers. Um, don't go over old ground. There are certain tropes and themes in existential psychotherapy. If you feel you have got something fresh to say about an old topic, then feel free. Have a go. But if you're going to write a paper on whether Yalom's four givens are valid or not, then we've probably seen it before and may not contribute to knowledge, which is obviously one of the criteria that we have for our reviewers. Is it going to contribute to new knowledge? And also, finally, please don't plagiarize or fail to attribute the work of others. Okay, and that is the end of the sort of formal part of this.